The incredible story of Starbucks began in 1981 when a housewares salesman, Howard Schultz, noticed a very peculiar phenomenon. A small company from Seattle was making extraordinarily large orders for manual coffee machines. This company was Starbucks, and at that time, it had only 4 stores. However, no one in the US was buying as many manual coffee machines as they were, which puzzled Howard. In Seattle, everyone loved this coffee shop, while the rest of the country used electric coffee makers. Howard decided to visit and see what was happening with this company. When he arrived in Seattle and approached the doors of Starbucks, they opened, and the intoxicating aroma of coffee drew him inside. Howard found himself in a place that felt like a temple devoted to coffee. Behind the worn wooden counter stood baskets of coffee from around the world: Sumatra, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Costa Rica. At that time, everyone in America thought coffee came straight from a can, but Starbucks sold whole bean coffee. It turned out that people preferred manual coffee makers because they enjoyed the brewing process, and the coffee didn't burn like it did in electric coffee makers. When the guy behind the counter handed Howard a freshly brewed cup of coffee, its steam and aroma seemed to envelop his entire face. Adding sugar and milk was considered a mortal sin. Howard took a tentative sip, and his eyes widened in amazement. He was captivated by the extraordinary flavor. It was the strongest coffee he had ever tasted. At Starbucks, they roasted coffee beans to a deep black, believing that dark roasting revealed the full, true flavor of the coffee. Everything Howard had drunk before now seemed like swill. Now he was eager to learn how to brew coffee the same way and started asking the company's employees about the different types and roasting methods. Eventually, Howard went to the factory where they roasted coffee beans to meet the company's owners, Gerald Baldwin and Gordon Bowker. There, he again experienced that wonderful aroma of roasted black coffee, which was so intense it made his head spin. Howard was torn with curiosity about why these two had decided to devote their entire lives to coffee. By then, Starbucks was already 10 years old, and none of them even thought about building a business empire. They had founded Starbucks for one reason only: they simply loved coffee and wanted Seattle to have access to the best varieties. It turned out that in the USA, the richest country in the world, the leading brand in the Western market was serving terrible coffee. Most of the consumed coffee was cheap, lower-grade Robusta. Even genuine whole bean coffee was diluted with cheap beans in pursuit of profit. Major coffee brands sacrificed taste for competition. The first Starbucks opened in 1971 with 30 varieties of whole bean coffee. It was just a store. They didn't sell coffee by the cup back then. That's when the tradition of communicating with customers and sharing knowledge about good coffee began. This interaction brought people closer and sparked word of mouth, so the customer base grew rapidly. For the founders of Starbucks, quality was paramount. They were fighters for coffee purity and never aimed to please the masses, but rather a small group of customers with refined tastes. Typically, producers prefer light roasting because it's more profitable. The longer the roast, the less weight. But Starbucks cared more about taste than profit, and this set them apart from everyone else. It takes time to cultivate a new taste, but gradually, the high-quality standard evoked admiration, loyalty, and most importantly, commitment among people. At some point, the number of customers exceeded all expectations. Howard couldn't stop thinking about Starbucks, and a year later, he quit his prestigious job with a solid salary of $75,000 for this small company with 5 coffee shops. To many, it seemed like madness, But Howard was not thinking about what Starbucks was, but what it could become. He envisioned expanding to other cities. Why shouldn't other Americans experience the delight of real coffee? Howard asked the Starbucks owners to take him on the team and told them, "You possess a real treasure. Give anyone from any city a taste, and they will instantly fall in love with your coffee. We can open hundreds of new stores and expand Starbucks nationwide." The owners were skeptical, but eventually agreed and gave him some shares. Howard immediately dove into the work, standing behind the counter, talking to the staff, tasting coffee, and learning to identify the subtle nuances of different roasting methods. Time passed, and Howard increasingly gained the team's trust, but the most interesting part happened a bit later. Once, Howard was strolling through Italy and visited every coffee shop to see how things were set up. What he saw amazed him. Howard saw a barista moving gracefully, simultaneously chatting with visitors, grinding beans, and pouring coffee. He noticed that the barista greeted everyone by name, and the visitors enjoyed every moment. Howard was captivated. He discovered the romance of Italian coffee shops with their friendly atmosphere. At that time, there were about 200,000 coffee shops in Italy located on every corner. Italy had terrible infrastructure but incredible food. Italians pay attention to every detail in food and choose only the best. Americans perceive a coffee shop as a snack bar, while for Italians, it's a cozy home. For Americans, a barista is just an unskilled worker, but in Italy, it is a respected person. Seeing this, Howard had an epiphany. This is what Starbucks was missing. It was like a divine revelation. Starbucks sells great coffee, but does not offer it in cups, only in packages. In one of the coffee shops, Howard ordered a latte, something he had never known before. He thought it would be just coffee with milk, but it turned out to be something incredible. A harmony of frothy milk and espresso, a flawless drink. No one in America knew anything like it. Italians had turned coffee drinking into a symphony. Howard returned to Seattle inspired, but to the bosses, he was just an overly excited marketing director. The bosses stated that Starbucks was a store, not a restaurant, and selling drinks in cups would violate the integrity of the mission. Moreover, at that moment, they were busy acquiring their longtime competitor, a coffee shop chain called Pizza, Coffee, and Tea. It was up for sale, and for the Starbucks executives, it was a chance to expand their network of stores. The idea seemed more attractive to them than creating a network of restaurants, but after the expensive purchase and expansion, Starbucks became mired in debt. A large loan tied their hands, and the heavy burden deprived them of flexibility. The executives' attention was scattered between two cities, and they had to shuttle between San Francisco and Seattle. The team's efficiency decreased, and on top of that, there was Howard with his idea. The executives did not want to sell coffee in cups at all, and Howard's frustration grew. The executives resisted for a long time, but at some point, they finally allowed him to open one espresso bar in downtown Seattle. On that day, America tried a latte coffee for the first time. In one day, the coffee shop had twice as many visitors as usual in other stores. Gradually, the business grew. More and more visitors came, and a line began to form outside. The coffee shop became a meeting place with an exciting atmosphere. However, the executives considered this success a distraction from the main direction. They did not want Starbucks to be perceived as a coffee shop that quickly brews coffee, nor did they want to become restaurateurs. All they agreed to was to open a bar in one or two more stores, and no more. The owners thought that Starbucks didn't need to become bigger than it was. They said, "If we have too many customers, we won't be able to remember their names like we do now. Sorry, Howard, but you'll have to accept it." Howard sank into depression for several months, paralyzed by uncertainty. The company had financial problems, but even in this difficult situation, it refused the already proven, profitable path of development. However, Howard couldn't just give up on his grand idea of an Italian-style espresso bar. He decided to leave Starbucks to start his own business, coffee shops on busy streets. He was confident that his idea would interest investors, but he needed to raise $1.7 million. Howard proudly conducted a presentation and presented a business plan for 50 coffee shops to a coffee machine manufacturing company. Filled with enthusiasm, he said, "One day people will say a cup of Starbucks instead of a cup of coffee, and there will be long lines on the streets." It seemed that the offer would be a guaranteed success since Famer sold coffee machines, and who better to be interested in selling their product? However, the company declined, citing that Americans could not enjoy espresso as Italians did. If you want to know what failures feel like, try raising money for a new business. Doors will close in your face, people will treat you with suspicion, undermine your confidence, and give you hundreds of reasons why your idea is rubbish, Howard said. For a year, Howard was not just a failure, but a failure among failures. It was the hardest period of his life. Howard was considered crazy because no one believed that Americans would spend $1.50 on coffee. Gathering funds took a lot of energy. The workday was spent asking for money, running to meetings, and perfecting the presentation. Howard approached everyone he saw as a potential investor. He felt constantly rejected when he knocked on yet another door. He naively started conversations with everyone. Often people refused with high arrogance, and Howard felt like a poor waiter running back and forth for meager tips. Many said the idea was crazy and suggested he find a normal job, while some simply didn't call back. Throughout the year, Howard met with 242 people, of whom 217 said no. It was hard to stay upbeat, constantly hearing from everyone that your idea was rubbish. However, the questions and objections of investors repeated, so Howard's presentation gradually improved. The irony is that Howard's first investor was Starbucks itself. Jerry Baldwin offered $150,000. Although the founders of Starbucks did not want to pursue Howard's idea, they believed in Howard himself. The first external investor was Dr. Ron Margolis. Ron refused to look at the business plan, interrupted the excited Howard, and immediately asked, "How much do you need? Is $100,000 enough?" Ron sympathized with Howard because he was already familiar with his professionalism and knew Howard could be trusted. After this investment, Ron's investments grew to $10 million. The next investor was Harold Gorlick, who gave more than $200,000, the largest check collected at that time. Then 3 business titans from Seattle invested: Jack Berenyi, Herman Sarkowski, and Sam Stroom. As a group, they invested $750,000. All those first investors who believed in Howard were generously rewarded and received a 100-to-1 return. Initially, Howard was wary of venture investments because he had heard that some venture investors interfere in business operations and end up ruining everything with their short-sighted approach. Bad partners might pursue immediate interests at the expense of the company's future, Howard thought. However, his fears proved unfounded. Instead of interference, Howard gained many authoritative and experienced advisors. On April 8, 1981, Howard Schultz opened his first coffee shop, naming it Il Giornale, which means the daily. Howard and his friends frequented their own coffee shop, consuming lots of food and coffee to show potential investors high sales figures. Howard recreated the Italian atmosphere. Italian opera played, baristas wore white shirts and bow ties, there were no seats, and newspapers hung along the walls. The menu and decor were also Italian. However, much of this didn't suit Seattle. People got tired of the opera music, bow ties proved impractical, and visitors had nowhere to sit. Howard had to quickly correct these mistakes, but overall, the idea worked, and the number of customers grew from 300 to 1,000 a day within 6 months. The coffee shop was ahead of its time and looked like a real gem. Customers felt special, like members of a private club. The competitive advantage was the speed of service. The key to success was the employees, infected with Howard's enthusiasm. They worked like a family, often visiting each other for pizza. After 6 months, Howard opened a second coffee shop, and the third one immediately in Canada to demonstrate to investors the ability for large-scale growth. All 3 coffee shops quickly became popular, and sales volumes grew. The owners of Starbucks, Jerry and Gordon, faced financial difficulties and decided to sell the company to Howard Schultz. On August 18, 1987, the modern Starbucks was born. The Il Giornale coffee shops were rebranded. After the merger, Starbucks became both a store and a coffee house, which was its distinguishing feature. Starbucks expanded into new cities, opening more coffee houses each year. As Starbucks grew, Howard feared potential competitors. The issue of coffee freshness was solved by vacuum packaging with a one-way valve that released carbon dioxide but did not let in oxygen or moisture. This allowed coffee to stay fresh even 1,000 miles from the plant. At one point, Starbucks lost 4 times the planned amount, and shareholders thought Howard had lost his way. But he insisted on continuing investments until 3 conditions were met: creating a team for scaling, building a new world-class plant, and implementing a computer system to control hundreds of locations. These measures seemed expensive, but timely preparation allowed for significant savings in the future and readiness for unexpected problems arising from rapid growth. Howard couldn't imagine how lonely it could be to run a company. Very few could share his struggles, despair, and anxieties. Howard felt a sharp need for a professional friend, someone with experience managing rapidly growing retail companies who could offer wise advice. In Seattle, there was Jeff Brotman, who created the wholesale store Costco, and over 20 years turned the company into a network of 250 wholesale club stores with a revenue of $19 billion. Compared to Costco, Starbucks seemed tiny. Howard met Jeff while raising investments and found him trustworthy. Jeff had a sixth sense and generously shared advice with Howard. Later, Howard convinced Jeff to become a board member, as other members found it easier to believe in Jeff's experience and authority than in Howard's assumptions. During a period of intense growth, Howard Schultz needed new investments. However, retail had lost its former appeal, and venture capitalists preferred IT companies. Thanks to Jeff Brotman's authority, Craig Foley, then head of Citibank Chancellor Capital Management, was convinced to invest. Craig made a significant contribution of $4.5 million, which acted as a gesture of trust and attracted the attention of other investors. As a result, in 1990, a record $13.5 million was raised. Howard had no idea about venture capital and later regretted the premature capital raising. However, unlike IT businesses, rapid offline growth is only possible through the expansion of retail outlets, which inevitably requires constant financial infusions for construction, inventory, and rent. Therefore, Howard Schultz had no other choice or there would not have been such rapid and smooth growth. The expansion of Starbucks accelerated rapidly. In 1992, 50 coffee shops were opened, and in 1993, 100 more followed. Wall Street analysts were thrilled watching Starbucks' sales figures. They initially targeted markets with a high number of mail-order customers, highly educated, affluent individuals who traveled a lot and were interested in culture and the arts. But competitors were not idle. The coffee business attracted many new players, so Starbucks accelerated its expansion, conquering the East Coast, New York, and Boston. In Boston, Starbucks made an unexpected move by purchasing the Coffee Connection, a local chain of 25 coffee shops, instead of waging a war against local competitors. This acquisition included the recipe for a new drink, the Frappuccino. The Frappuccino, a blend of cappuccino, milkshake, and ice cream, became fantastically popular and an instant hit. It brought profits even in the summer, when coffee shops were usually less busy. In 1994, the company faced problems again. A severe frost hit Brazil, causing coffee prices to skyrocket. Brazil accounts for a third of the world's coffee supply. Starbucks stock prices fell. The previous frost in 1986 had kept coffee prices high for several years, posing a serious crisis threat to Starbucks. Fortunately, the company had a 10-month supply of green coffee thanks to long-term fixed-price contracts. Starbucks was protected because it purchased coffee directly. Other large companies immediately raised prices on canned coffee as their supplies were modest. Starbucks' reserves allowed it to keep prices low. The company even made a profit during the crisis through internal optimization and cost reduction. The crisis revealed weak spots in contracts, expenses, planning, and resources. Howard Schultz was always amazed that, ironically, the company thrived the most during major setbacks. As the Starbucks network grew, customers began to complain that all the coffee shops looked the same, while competitors impressed with original decor and stylish design. This was a challenge for Starbucks: how to open 300 coffee shops a year without them looking alike. Starbucks started experimenting with design and found that people valued sofas, armchairs, and fireplaces, which created a special atmosphere. In one Manhattan coffee shop, they placed sofas and armchairs, bought at a garage sale, and the coffee shop quickly became popular, turning into a meeting place. However, original design was expensive, which conflicted with the strategy of rapid growth. The problem was solved by standardizing the design and making bulk purchases, which allowed for cost and time reduction in developing coffee shops. Howard Schultz created a secret studio where a team of architects, artists, and designers worked on creating the coffee shop of the future. They used the concept of the 4 elements: earth, fire, water, and air, which they reflected in the 4 stages of coffee preparation. This resulted in 4 design types that diversified Starbucks coffee shops. Each time a new Starbucks opened in a new city, skeptics predicted failure. No one believed that espresso would become so popular, or that coffee shops would appear on every corner. However, on the first day of operation in each city, long lines formed in the shops. Although Howard Schultz was a marketer, he did not rely on traditional advertising. The secret lay in creating word of mouth, where people talked about Starbucks on their own. In each city, Starbucks organized concerts with famous musicians and invited influential people, drawing attention to the brand. In Tokyo, where there were already coffee shops on every corner, Starbucks generated the same buzz as it did in Seattle. Starbucks did not strive to build a strong brand. The brand emerged as a result of the team's passion. Starbucks invested in its employees, creating a new market, The average bill was $3.50, but customers returned on average 18 times a month. The strongest brands are built with soul and spirit, not advertising campaigns. Customers returned not only for the coffee, but also for the people and atmosphere. The staff did everything to make you feel special. They greeted you with a smile, called you by name. This is hard to forget. Unfortunately, mediocrity prevails everywhere. We are served by people who don't care about us. They are only interested in our money. If you use too much water for brewing, the coffee will be tasteless. If you overbrew the coffee, it will be bitter. Service staff are the least paid, even though they are the face of the company. When an old employee leaves, the connection with customers is lost, and they leave too. One unpleasant moment, and you've lost a customer forever. But Howard Schultz changed the approach to work and reduced staff turnover. In the late 80s, generosity was not in vogue, and benefits packages were rare, but instead of cutting healthcare costs, Starbucks increased them. This seemed like a crazy idea. The board members were surprised because these were huge additional costs. However, it turned out to be the best decision in the company's history. In fast food chains, staff turnover usually ranges from 150 to 400% per year, but at Starbucks, it dropped to less than 65%. Reducing turnover significantly cut hiring and training costs, since training an employee is twice as expensive as a benefits package. No matter how perfect the business plan, it makes no sense if employees do not put their heart into the common cause. For this, Howard Schultz even had the honor of meeting President Clinton. At some point, it seemed like Starbucks was on every corner. For consumers, the bigger the company, the less human it seems. Large companies lose individuality, while small entrepreneurs are perceived as caring workers. The public has cemented the notion that big means bad. Howard Schultz broke this stereotype. He distributed stock options to over 700 employees in 1991. One option was 12% of the annual salary. Later, these employees were able to sell them and afford expensive cars and suburban homes. This policy contradicts the norm in the business world. Companies usually focus on profit and consider their employees expendable. However, owning shares, an employee feels involved and treats the work with the same responsibility as the company's management. Stock options are usually given in IT companies to leading programmers, but this had never happened before in retail history. Employees came up with innovative ideas to increase sales, new products, and reduce costs. The distribution of stock options changed employees' attitudes. One such employee was Howard Bahar. He often raised his voice in meetings, never remaining indifferent to any issue, was sincere, and embarrassed everyone with his directness. What he thought, he said. Usually, people are restrained, trying not to speak bluntly, but Howard Bahar openly argued with anyone and any time. At meetings, in the factory, in the hallway. He questioned why words were stretched out over 3 pages. Why not give customers everything they want? Why cafe managers were afraid to express their opinions. Howard Bahar clearly formulated his thoughts and sought sincerity from others. One time, he suggested opening each cafe 10 minutes earlier and closing 10 minutes later to exceed customer expectations, which infuriated cafe directors to the limit. But his goal was different. With such audacious statements, he shocked his interlocutors, thus enlivening and setting the stage for an honest conversation, because without sincerity and openness, no new idea would be born. He intentionally provoked conflicts to force others to look at things more broadly. Howard Bahar made many people part with their dogmas and reconsider many values. Once Bahar noticed an interesting thing. Many visitors wanted skim milk, but Starbucks did not offer it. Bihar rushed to Howard Schultz and boldly asked, "Do you read customer feedback?" "Of course," Schultz replied. "Then why don't you respond?" "To what?" "Look at how many people want skim milk." "I did a tasting. It just doesn't taste good," Schultz said. "According to whose taste?" Bihar replied, losing his temper. At that time, skim milk at Starbucks was equated with treason. The issue of fatty milk sparked one of the hottest debates in the company's history. Howard Bihar was against everyone, and everyone was against him. He insisted that Schultz at least try it, but it was all in vain. If you grow a company like a child, it's hard to get rid of the instinctive desire to take care of every little detail. But at some point, Schultz realized that by closing his ears, he was depriving the company of great opportunities, and as a result, now half of the sales volume of that same latte is with skim milk. Howard Bihar hit right at the heart of the customer. Questioning conventional wisdom is incomparable satisfaction, and achieving a result contrary to conventional wisdom is double the satisfaction. The mistake of many entrepreneurs is to put loyal and devoted people in leadership positions, but without the necessary skills. Loyal aides agree with you on everything, pandering to your vanity, while strong people stimulate growth. If a person is able to assemble a team, inspire, and unite them on the same wavelength, together they can create wonders. The strength of the Starbucks brand and the spirit of the company cannot be felt by touch or converted into numbers. However, before an IPO, initial public offering, an adequate valuation of the company is crucial. Although major investment banks were impressed by Starbucks' economics and efficiency, to them, it was just another unnoticed company from a long list of potential IPOs. They only evaluated the numbers and did not take into account the company's values. Bankers do not understand how difficult it is to build values year after year. They are from another world, indifferent to how Starbucks treats its employees. For them, only financial gain matters. The best sectors for investment were considered to be biotechnology and fiber optics, and coffee shops seemed insignificant. Bankers did not believe that Starbucks could maintain high growth rates. Therefore, Howard Schultz had to search long and hard for someone who would understand that Starbucks was not just another restaurant. To do this, he had to hold a competition among 7 investment banks to find the one that understood what Starbucks was all about. It was about an ambitious company that was risking changing Americans' attitudes toward coffee. On June 26, 1996, Starbucks went public with an opening price of $17 per share. The prices of most newcomer companies usually drop immediately after the listing. But as soon as trading began, Starbucks shares soared to 20 each. Contrary to Wall Street analysts' predictions, the stock price remained high and reached $33 in 3 months. As a result, the IPO managed to raise significantly more than expected, $420 million. Starbucks entered the big leagues. The value of Starbucks shares always exceeded its profit, much to the delight of skeptics, so speculators loved to bet against it, but they always lost. Why are people willing to stand in long lines for a cup? At first glance, it seems that it's just for the coffee. However, it's much deeper. Starbucks created a third place, a cozy corner between work and home where people can escape from their daily worries. Exotic coffee varieties and beverages are a luxury that everyone can afford. Customers are willing to take a longer route to stop by and have their morning coffee. Some competitors openly state that that they are waiting for Starbucks to come to their location, because when people know there are places where they can sit, they gravitate there. As a result, both sides benefit. Visiting Starbucks is like a short escape from the hustle and bustle. It's a breath of fresh air. People come here not just for the coffee, but for the atmosphere and communication. It's not just coffee, and not even gourmet coffee, it's a lifestyle phenomenon.